So why did it end? From the perspective of 1950, it would have been very difficult to imagine that Chinese cooperation with the Soviet Union and its allies, which actually made some sense in some form for any Chinese government, would founder so quickly after 1 decade, never to be revived. The Sino-Soviet alliance was, in some sense, preordained by the role of the Soviet Union as China's tutor in international communism in general, and its leadership of the Chinese Communist Party from afar. This relationship began in the 1950s with great dreams and clear blueprints, not just for red factories, but for the path to a Stalinist society that was outlined in Stalin's famous short course. And maybe that is one conclusion we have to draw. No alliance could have withstood the enormously high expectations that accompanied the Sino-Soviet partnership, not just for security and economic development, but for the path to a shared and indeed universal utopia. More concretely, since the entire system of the socialist world economy was founded on the presumption that these countries shared political, ideological, and military needs in the creation and defense of international communism, if the political world of socialism became unglued, became disputatious, then everything else was thrown into uncertainty. In this world, far removed from what Marx and Engels had imagined, politics was not the superstructure representing economic forces. Things were just the other way around. One can read in the archives of China's economic relations with the Eastern Bloc and never know of the tensions that would tear this bloc apart in the late 1950s and early 1960s. That's because there were no economic contradictions compelling enough to lead to a breakdown. Even after the Great Leap Forward and after the Chinese-Soviet split, there would still be bilateral agreements, albeit of lesser value, that would continue to be signed between China and the other socialist nations and honored into the 1960s and beyond. But the tensions that blew this bloc apart ultimately emerged in politics, above all in Mao Zedong's growing pretensions to ideological originality, his own belief that he was the rightful successor to Stalin as the leader of international communism, his own belief that challenged the concept of Soviet and scientific planning, a belief that would come to undermine the founding assumption of this alliance, which had been and always had been Soviet leadership. It were these assumptions, among others, that would lead China into economic chaos and international isolation. The triumph of Mao's politics and ideology over China's national interests in the late 1950s and early 1960s would place at risk the very existence of the Chinese nation and Chinese people. But it would maintain Mao Zedong's own conception of his role in the Chinese and world revolution. Beyond destroying the solidarity of the socialist economic world, Mao Zedong gave a death blow to communism as an international movement. And as Khrushchev had predicted, in the place of a dream of communist internationalism would come, at best, a series of national socialisms. The moment of no return came on July 16, 1960, when the Soviet Union notified Beijing that its exports would be withdrawn from China. Perhaps it was this decision that Khrushchev recalled when he spoke frankly in June of 1964. He reminisced, "Many of us communists at first thought that in relations between socialist countries, there ought not, in principle, to be a single hitch. But life has proved to be much more complicated and contradictory than ideological conjectures."